Hey guys, I don't know if you can hear me or see me. There's only a couple people on the call or the study session. Um, hey Thomas, how's it going? Glad you're here. I'll invite you in. I guess whenever you let me know if you can get on, that'd be great. So thanks a lot. And it's probably be a shorter one. We'll see if people will start coming in, but. Thinking of going over the New York agreement. So let me pull that up just here. So New York, EOS New York has they don't call it a constitution, but they call it a user agreement. And so it'd be great to go over that really quickly. Let me, I had to pull it up here quick. And there's probably a few other housekeeping items I can talk about in the meantime. So we have a governance conference coming up on December 11th and 12th. So hopefully all you guys that are watching these videos can attend. It's going to be probably a half-day event starting from kind of mid-afternoon East Coast time, and we'll go all the way through the night. So yeah, hopefully you guys, we have a lot of great speakers. I can put in some of the speakers we have so far. Thomas, you'll be there, I'm sure. We had to kind of finalize the details there, but then we have Ash, Oro. Let me actually pull up the screen share and pull up the website too. So, okay, so I'll go ahead and so I'm gonna add you here, Thomas. So hopefully he hops on, but if you look at the website, we have Thomas. Hey, we put you on. How's it going? We put you on the conference website here. I'm just showing it here.
Super.
We got Thomas. We got Ash Oro, Dmitry, who's kind of taking the lead on the Russian version of the Constitution.
Oh, he's done more than that.
Yeah. much more than that. But hopefully he'll be able to discuss that as during the conference. We got Daniel talking about the referendum, Miles Schneider, who's from Multicoin Capital but has his own block producer team, Amy from SageWise, Ian, Douglas, Horn, Yetzi, Eves. Josh will talk about the referendum and probably some details about EEP, which I just saw a link to. I didn't read it, but that'd be exciting to see what's going on with that. And then Justin, he's working on kind of the process and trying to kind of find a way to kind of get a few constitutions, or kind of narrow down a few constitutions for voting in the beginning of the year. So he's got a Trello board that we could help him out with, actually, right? Together to help him answer, just kind of collaborate and answer some questions, and just be able to organize so that we can have a couple strong or few strong proposals for the referendum in the beginning of the year. So, but that's pretty much it. So that's next week. Oh, not next week. The 11th. So it's the week after next. It's
11th is a Tuesday, I think.
Yeah, it's a Tuesday, and then it'll go late late afternoon all the way through the night if you're East Coast. So it's and everybody else around the world is going to have, I wish I knew the UTC time, but we'll put it up there on the website. So that's pretty much it. So hey, thanks Thomas for joining us.
Sure thing.
I was thinking of going over the New York proposal. I have to kind of search for it and find it. I don't know if you have a link for that.
I was just looking at it a little while ago. I'll race you. We'll both look.
Okay, sounds good. So I'm gonna have to Google, so I'm behind here. So yes, New York.
Bingo, got it. It's on Medium, and I will stick the link in the chat.
All right, awesome.
Version 2, November 27th, came out yesterday.
Oh wow! Okay, so this is this is hot off the press.
Hot off the press, man. Very timely for you to cover this.
Awesome. That's great. So I can screen share here too. Unless you want to screen share. Do you want to?
Sure, I can.
Okay. If you like. So yeah, you could go ahead and screen share, and maybe
I know you're running the whole show here, so
no,
you happy to take a little piece of that.
Well, yeah, no, it'd be great to get your input. Like we can, you can kind of lead the
like color commentators.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so I'm gonna zoom my screen resolution in, so it'll be a nice big text when I screen share.
That's awesome.
And let me find the screen share feature. Screen share. There you go. Application window, EOS platform user agreement, share.
All right, that's great. Okay, so I could see it well right now.
Brilliant.
So
and shall we walk through it?
Yeah.
This reminds me of a Monty Python sketch, by the way.
All right.
Most things remind me of Monty Python, but this in particular. There's novel writing. We got two guys like sportscasters when they're watching the novelist Thomas Hardy write a new novel, and they've got soccer crowd noises playing in the background. It's you should check it out sometime. It's audio only. It's quite funny. Anyway.
Oh wow! I have to know.
Hopefully, we'll be maybe a little less humorous, a little more useful to the viewers. Because by the way, this platform user agreement is one of the most important documents I think for folks to be looking at right now. Because right now we're maybe a month away from what we anticipate will be the vote for ratifying a new constitution for the EOS mainnet. And the current expectation is that January 1st is when that ballot will be ready, where if you have tokens and tokens are staked, you can vote on which one or more constitutions you would like. I assume or more, because we don't yet know how the ballot will be constructed. My current guess is that it might list 3 or 4 choices, and you could put a check mark saying, yeah, I could live with that one. Yeah, I could live with that one. And you leave blank the ones you hate. If you just like one, you just check the one. I would love to have a first choice, second choice, so you could express a preference that way. But any way that we can make it as easy as possible for folks to vote is important. But then what are they voting on is the question. And this is one answer. This user agreement was created by the EOS New York guys as a talking piece for people like you and me and your viewers who want to create a new constitution for mainnet. And they specifically said, we're never going to propose this. If others want to propose it or some version of it or take pieces out of it to propose, that's great. And so what's nice about that is it gives us something to look at that isn't being championed, by someone so much as it is being offered for a thoughtful consideration.
Yeah, that is interesting. I think to kind of throw this to the out there to the community for them to kind of take more ownership of it. Is there, and then the other flip side is, hey, sometimes it's good to just kind of take the lead as well, just for efficiency's sake. So what do are there other reasons, do you think, that maybe they don't want to take as much ownership?
Well, no, EOS New York has been scrupulous in their in a couple of values that they champion, one of which is total neutrality on anything other than excellent block production. So even when they might have a strong opinion as individuals, they never use their block producer status to try to push people in that direction. They're much more interested in saying, hey, here's our thinking. What do you want to do? And so it's very respectful in that regard. And that's one of the reasons they're not going to propose it, because they don't see it's the job of a block producer to be proposing referenda. So more power to them. So on the one hand, they've thought about it very deeply. On the other hand, they're sticking to their knitting and being really respectful of the voters. So that's I try not to play favorites with block producers, but I must say that the track record of EOS New York in this space has been just outstanding. And they've criticized me and things I've done. They've criticized pretty much anybody and everybody, including even themselves, if appropriate, because they really champion the interests of the token holder. And that's why I consider them the gold standard for really scrupulously careful block producer. Again, totally my own personal opinion. So the first thing I notice as I'm reading this version 2, the brand new user agreement draft provided by EOS New York, is that they don't call it a constitution. And now I will tell you from my own reading, I'll have to wave a book at you here at some point. There's an academic discipline for creating collective organizations, and a self-created collective where people are all autonomous individuals. They're all equal. None of them has power over the other ones. And then they join together to create a new entity that has collective powers. Whatever the document is they create to codify what the new entity is, it's called a constitution with a lowercase c, just because that's the word in English for that kind of document, as opposed to a charter, which is something that a master organization gives to a subsidiary organization, like the International Coach Federation gives a charter to the Oregon Coach Federation, which is a subsidiary. They have to meet certain standards or they get their charter taken away. And so I would not call something like this a charter, because it's not coming from the mothership somewhere. It's really the EOS mainnet is its own thing. It's not a subsidiary of IBM. It's not owned by General Motors or the UK government or somebody. And so charter is probably the wrong word from a technical perspective. But my friend Steve Floyd is very vocal in saying the word constitution is a horrible word to use because it's confusing. In particular, it drives off, he claims, developers who get a little annoyed or bothered by some of the more fanciful description of EOS mainnet as a separate country or an independent nation state or a virtual nation, or it's like, yeah, I totally get why that seems weird, and you shouldn't have to believe that narrative to write software. I mean, I don't care if you buy into this vision of EOS as a nation state or not. I just want people to come and write cool distributed apps and solve problems in the world. And if the word constitution keeps people away and the phrase user agreement is a better description for marketing purposes, yay, that's fine with me. Just call it that on the ballot. And on January 1st, when the ballot happens, you check that box. And if that's the winner, then we won't have a constitution anymore. We'll have a thing that functions as a constitution called a user agreement. Whatever. I don't care. I'll support whatever the voters say. So you'll notice this is the very first thing they lead with is this a rename from constitution to user agreement. So I'm cool with that. And I think that's the back.
And I like your definition. I think the way you defined a constitution and charter actually is very clear, and I like that. I mean, I think that's very educational for everyone to know, what a constitution means and what a charter means and the distinctions. And then also,
I've been drinking from a fire hose on governance the last year and a half, year and 3 months, just to understand all this stuff better. Because, you can be a blockchain guru with regards to, writing smart contracts or Bitcoin internals or something. But, whoever told you about collective entities and the creation of a collective from scratch, I mean, that's political science.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's a subtle body of knowledge around this. There's a technical terminology, but none of us were trained in that, probably.
True. Hey, but we have to let Yetzi know that his charter is he still calls it a charter, right?
and if he's not using the word in a technical sense, or he just likes the way it sounds. It's like, yeah, okay.
Sure. Okay.
Anyway, so I love the fact that they open with that, because I think it gives voice to that concern. It gives people a chance to maybe vote on it. And then the next thing are design principles. I love this part. I'm a huge proponent. Anytime you do something really complicated, like a constitution or a governing document of any kind, to say, here are the principles I'm trying to enact or to give voice to. In that way, if you notice one of the design principles is one that bothers you, at least you know that it's a fundamental disagreement, and you're not trying to like nitpick every instance of that design. It's really, your disagreement might be at the design level, or you're agreeing on the design, and then your nitpicking actually makes it stronger potentially. And so I would love to walk through these design principles with you, if that's okay.
Sure, great.
And the first is that items are enforceable. And I actually, believe it or not, disagree with this, which is going to sound wacky and very non-blockchain-like, but I have a reason. I read an article probably a year and a half, 9 months ago, would have been late winter, early spring, as we were working on the earliest drafts of the Constitution. The article, as I recall, was called Street Smart Contracts. And it was written by a lawyer who'd been doing contract law for many years. And her argument is that contracts often contain language that is ambiguous and clauses that are hard or impossible to enforce. And why might you do that? And her answer, as best I recall from memory, and I would encourage people to read it for themselves, the title is Street Smart Contracts, is that ultimately contracts are for humans. Yes, there needs to be enforceable pieces, but these other parts of an agreement might, signal to each. It might be a way for us to signal to each other like what our values are, or it might be, we might want to keep things vague so that only when we try to enforce it will we have to like put flesh on those bones, and keeping it vague might give us some useful wiggle room as we try to come to agreement. And having unenforceable elements of an otherwise enforceable contract might give you a way to express your human values to each other. It's like, we both agree, mom and apple pie are great. And it's like, but that's got nothing to do with our contract. Yes, but it helps us feel good about each other as people if we both feel that way, for instance. Or you might be, holding out onto a value that, again, might not be enforceable, but is important to communicate as part of your larger relationship with this other person or entity. I may not be doing the best job of defending her thesis, but I'm trying to do my best to recap my memory of it. And so there may be a place in at least some contracts for things that might be hard to enforce. Okay, so I'm going to set that aside and say, as a design principle for a governing document, items are enforceable makes a ton of sense, especially in a smart contract platform. So I will not encourage people to change this so much as I will encourage people to read that article that I mentioned and contemplate where and when hard to enforce or uneven, outright unenforceable clauses might be useful to you in contracts.
Yeah, and and I agree with you. I did read something, probably another document that also mentioned something similar about how typical contracts have certain clauses that aren't enforceable but have that still can help I guess with certain types of agreements. So I've read that. It wasn't from the author you mentioned, but it was probably another piece on the difference between smart contracts and legal contracts. But they did mention that, like these kinds of unenforceable items that could be useful. So, but anyway, we can put that.
I just found the link to that. I'll go ahead and put that in the chat here.
Okay.
So let me give you a piece of her abstract here. The author, Karen Levy, says that contracts serve many functions that are not explicitly legal in nature or even designed to be formally enforced. And she describes 3 categories of contracting practices in which people engage. the inclusion of things that are on their face unenforceable, the inclusion of purposefully underspecified items, and the willful non-enforcement of enforceable terms.
This is actually the one I think. So it was her probably. I think this sounds familiar. So okay, this is great. Yeah. This is.
And again, you might say, yeah, that's great, but not in a governing document. And I might say, okay, good point. But I really think we, as students of smart contracts and blockchains, want to be aware of what Karen Levy has to say on the subject.
Yeah.
That's a lot of time to spend on one design principle, I know, but I think it's important.
We'll put this link on the YouTube.
Cool.
Okay, so we could go to the next one if you want.
Yeah. Then it establishes a framework of governing documents so that amendment of the EOS governance can be agile. And what they're saying is that in addition to the main document being a, quote, governing document, there are other documents that have enforcement power that have to be treated as if they were included in the Constitution and must be respected and can only be amended through the same constitutional amendment process. And having multiple documents is very smart, I think. And we did something similar back when we were trying to put together the initial interim Constitution, although I don't think we did as good a job as I think we'll find EOS New York has done. I'm in favor of having subsidiary documents that are mentioned explicitly. And I do think that does include it makes things more agile.
Okay, and then it's a framework, and maybe we should just go and figure out like what the other governing documents are.
Yeah, I'll do a quick search on the page here, and we'll get into that. Okay. Next thing that they do in their design principles is defining roles and responsibilities of user types, which makes a ton of sense, and I really wish we'd done that in the interim version better. Establishes the foundation of a dispute resolution framework. Yes. It empowers individuals to self-govern their disputes, which I think we already have that power, but okay. And then establishes, I would say formalizes, the uses of block producer powers, which, again, I think is absolutely correct. So I think we wanted to look at governing documents. Okay, well, there it is. So governing documents, this end user agreement, the reg producer smart contract, reg arb, which is the registering an arbitrator, reg forum, which is how you register an arbitration forum, which is where arbitrators are found. You often would specify not a named arbitrator in a smart contract. You might specify a particular forum, and then the forum would hand you an arbitrator or pick one or go through a selection process. And so these three things are all considered governing documents. And then in that way, if you needed to change one of them, you're not like, we are reopening the Constitution for amendments. Now we're just going to amend Reg Arb. That limits the scopes of changes, and that makes it, I think, easier to get agreement on changes. That's what would be my guess.
Great. And I'm not sure that they already have a version of, Reg Producer, Reg Arb, Reg Forum. Maybe that's to be determined.
I've seen previously published versions of both Reg Arb and Reg Forum.
Okay.
And Reg Producer has been around since the launch and probably is due for a refresh, frankly.
Okay, great.
So that's super. And next we have a set of definitions. Again, when I was working on the interim Constitution, I left definitions out just to try to slim it down and keep it small. And in retrospect, definition section is probably really helpful. So it's nice to see this. And it defines, what is the EUA? It's this document. What's a user? What is ownership? What is a referendum? What's a block producer? The chain ID. This is like how you identify which net is the main net. And the answer is there's the chain ID that you can obtain by querying a particular EOS network. And every chain ID is unique. So that's important. Network funds is a super category that includes the EOS names, EOS RAM fee, and EOS savings accounts. So
actually, if we back up, what was the ownership?
Yeah, okay. Ownership, yeah. Let's look at users. Users, any person or organization of persons who maintains direct or indirect ownership of an EOS account or property connected to an EOS account. Like, my mind blows. It's like, what? It's like, wait, what does connected mean? If I have my car is mentioned on a blockchain, is my car connected to an EOS account?
Yeah, you probably have to specify, what. I mean, that would probably, I assume.
Maybe it's further down, right? I mean, it's possible, but
yeah.
They're clearly trying to cast a broad net here. So if I'm an indirect owner, let's say I have EOS tokens through an exchange, then the exchange is the named owner, but I'm the beneficial owner, let's say.
Okay, so maybe that's, yes, examples are good because, that exchange example could be.
Right. Because as far as the mainnet is concerned, if you, quote, own tokens on an exchange, unquote, your name does not show up on the main net anywhere necessarily. I mean, you might happen to, but there's no guarantee of it. And so the mainnet just sees this big block of tokens owned by the exchange, and it's up to the exchange to run its own registry, its own books internally to say how many of those are owned by you. And so for purposes of the Constitution, or rather this user agreement, you're still a user even if you're one step removed from the network. And I think that's nice. It gives you some standing legally.
Okay.
Then ownership is defined as a direct or indirect access to an EOS account through one or more permissions or authorizations. Ownership may be shared between users and vary in weight. And so ownership is being defined. I'm going to interpret this as saying control of a key. And so if I lose access to my account, I've lost ownership. It's not just a lost key. It's like, it's not even my account anymore. If someone steals my key and changes the keys, it's their account now because I've lost my direct or indirect access to the account through permissions and authorizations.
Okay, yeah, and that makes
unless I'm missing a step, I might be missing something, right? Like maybe unauthorized changes don't actually change ownership. But see, this is a huge deal because on both Bitcoin and Ethereum, there is no separate concept of ownership. You just have control of the key or you don't. And while law enforcement might care if a key is, quote, stolen, unquote, or if Bitcoin tokens are, quote, stolen, unquote, neither Bitcoin nor Ethereum has a concept of ownership separate from key control. And we sort of do, or at least arguably we do. In conversation, we seem to. People talk about their key being, I got phished and someone stole my key. And we take that claim seriously. Maybe we should, maybe we shouldn't. Do we want to have a concept of ownership enthroned in the governance documents that is anything other than control of your keys? And what are the implications of that? Short answer, I don't know. But it seems like a really important one.
Yeah, ownership is just one of the big issues where it's really with Bitcoin and Ethereum, it is just about ownership of keys, and then I think the debate is if there's something different. I think and I think the version 1 created a different idea of ownership, but then there's a big, I think, a debate about what makes sense. So it would be
right. And the question is, how much like the non-blockchain world do we want to be? Like if someone steals your house key, they don't now own your house from a legal perspective. They might be able to sneak in or break in or gain access, but until the title changes hands, the key is just gets you through a particular lock. It doesn't, right? House keys and car keys don't convey ownership out here in the world. But if they do, or they have, sort of in blockchain world, even though when people have their Bitcoin stolen, they do go to the police and the police do arrest people for stealing Bitcoins. So the idea of ownership doesn't vanish. It's just not on chain for Bitcoin or Ethereum. And we've sort of put it on chain with EOS, and it's been a source of real contention. And I'll give you one example of how contentious it is. Someone claims they lost their key and claims a certain account belongs to them. But what if they're lying? Do you want an arbitrator to even have the ability to take the true owner, quote unquote, the true owner's account away from them or their tokens away from them and hand it to somebody who's just good at lying to arbitrators and creating, maybe falsified documents to prove their false claim of it being theirs. So that's new, and that is contentious, and that is the kind of thing that token holders need to weigh in on.
Yeah, and I think this identity is also a key too. If people are going to extend beyond keys, unless you are very confident that
if you had some way to register an identity or a pseudo identity and an account name and an ownership relationship between the person or identity and this account, then you can separate ownership from keys a little bit more and have some programmatic and some cryptographic strength to your claim, which we don't have right now. Again, that's why these ECAF stolen keys and compromised accounts cases are so very, very contentious, legitimately contentious.
I agree. Okay.
So I'm glad that we're going to hopefully hash this out in this upcoming vote, and we'll have a shared understanding that we come to on purpose. And so when people, people will still complain, but we will at least have a definitive answer instead of people trying to derive answers from incomplete data, which is, I think, where we are today.
Okay. All right. Great. So,
I noticed we're half an hour into the show and we're like, two paragraphs in.
All right. So
there's a lot to be said here. This is a very rich document.
Sure. I mean, it is. Yeah. It is. So no, I agree. So, but I'll let you. I'll let you kind of.
Thank you. Again, you can like bring in other, people who are listening if they want to comment or if they want to come on screen and you want to boot me off. It's your show, not mine. I don't want to turn this into, all me and nothing but me.
Yeah. Anyone has any questions, just feel free to just put it in the chat window. And there's a little ask the question box at the bottom of the screen as well. So just feel free, and then we'll try to answer it. But and then otherwise we'll try to kind of get through this efficiently. So,
right. So we've got a definition of ownership that appears to have to do with control through EOS permissions. Mm-hmm. And we'll see if there's more of that, like further down. What a referendum is, that looks pretty straightforward. It's the process by which token holder opinion is solicited on chain. I wouldn't call that opinion. I'd call it decisions. All user referendum indicating a desired action or inaction can only be enacted, removed, or otherwise put into effect in any way by 15 of 21 duly elected block producers. Yeah, we don't have a way currently for token holder votes to automatically, without additional intervention, turn into executing code. Even if you had a chunk of code and you said, vote for this chunk of code to be installed, even if that won a majority of votes or a super majority of votes, the block producers would still have to take the extra step of installing it, which I consider to be a feature, actually, because automatic execution of vote results is potentially very scary. You could have a bug in that code. And it's one of the reasons Ethereum folks are so scared of on-chain governance. It's the only way they could do it is by having auto-executed code. And that's that's like walking without a safety net on a high wire over a tank full of sharks.
Yeah. Is there a middle ground to that where you get the referendum that gives authorization for BPs, but the BPs can't implement it or execute it unless they have this other kind of referendum, either multi-sig or something, where it allows them to, so that, because I'm wondering if there's a way to just restrict the BP powers a little bit more.
I think that's a really interesting question, and I don't think we have a structure for that right now, but there certainly could be. I mean, I can imagine some sort of and I don't know if this is codable, so forgive me, I'm not a C++ programmer, but yeah, I think it's possible to hypothesize a sort of a multi-sig setup where you have a transaction. The transaction might be install this new system contract, let's say. And that transaction cannot get the block producer multi-sig authorization until it first gets some sort of voter authorization. And so the voting code would have to be code that tallies the votes and then applies some sort of signature or authentication, or changes the state of that proposed code from proposed to, voter approved, and therefore enactable. And so I can sort of conceive, if I had a pencil and paper and some time, I could draw a state diagram that would express it, but I'm not sure how you'd express it in code necessarily.
Yeah, that'd be great to consider as an alternative.
Yeah, because the more we can tie up block producers' hands, the less they have to fear, and the less we have to fear. Because people are rightfully twitchy about the fact that right now 15 block producers can do anything. Like literally, they can do whatever they wanted to. They could zero out my account and take those tokens and burn them, or reallocate them to themselves. And there's no code preventing that. Now, there's a lot of law and expectation socially not to do that, and one imagines the voters might punish them severely if they even attempted it, but we don't know that. And having more code protections and relying less just on voting and social pressure probably is wise, and certainly I'd be in favor of it.
Yeah, that'd be something definitely to pursue further, and hopefully we can have that in terms of safety for sure, as a because blockchains are all about security and safety.
Yeah, and folks who are new to EOS, look at the multi-sig powers of the block producers and go, "What? They can do anything? What?"
Yeah.
And so, locking down those superpowers would, I think, probably make the block producer job easier, make it more well-defined, and might also reassure folks who currently are nervous. Maybe rightly so.
Yeah. So Patrick has a question. I'm not sure if this is relevant here, but we might get to it eventually. Who's responsible to review the code of a smart contract in this proposal of the Constitution? So in terms of reviewing the code, and we might get to it down later, but do you want to answer that now or later?
It's a really good question. And there's probably like 8 or 9 different cases to discuss. Normally I would say it would be checked a bunch of times. The first of which is, if you were proposing some new smart contract code to go into a privileged position like the system contract, the very first thing that would happen is, during the voting process, which takes a minimum of 30 days and up to 120 days, there's ample time for people to look at and test that code and say, whoa, this doesn't do what the proponent says it does. Or, hey, when I ran it, this was buggy. Or, I see no evidence that the guy who proposed it has done any testing. I'm not going to bother testing it because he's not giving me any proof that it's solid. And so even during the proposal period, the voting period, you absolutely could see potentially quite a bit of checking by interested parties, not least the block producers, many of whom are very meticulous about these things. And then secondly, let's say it gets passed, then the next stage in theory is block producers stick it in, and I won't name them, but I can think of a bunch of very well regarded block producers who would then test the code all over again. And if it were squirrely and had bugs and, put the chain at risk, they might say, I'm sorry, I can't vote this in. And then again, now it starts to take like weird side paths, like, well, did the voters vote for a Ricardian contract plus a smart contract? And if so, can we keep the Ricardian, tweak the smart contract to remove the bug, and then just enact that without further voting? And my answer is, I have no idea. This is new ground for all of us. And that is why I would say, when in doubt, test the heck out of it, maybe get things formally verified. And I will vote against I personally, in my massive 20 tokens or however many I've got, would vote against any code that didn't show signs of massive amounts of testing and verification, and block producers who'd signed up and saying, yes, I've tested it too, and it looks solid, and so forth. So
Yeah, it'd be
it's up to the
interesting.
voters. It's up to the block. And again, if it passes the referendum and you're the block producer and you're supposed to install it, and then you discover signs of bugs or unintended side effects, you're probably ethically bound to refuse to sign and say, look, the referendum says stick it in, but what it's doing isn't what people voted for. Right? People didn't vote for crash the chain. And here I've got evidence this code crashes the chain. So sorry, I can't do that. And you would probably, well, it'd be up to the voters at that point whether they would praise you or punish you for doing that.
Yeah.
This is, by the way, why blockchain governance is hard. Okay.
True.
Patrick's question is an excellent question.
Okay. Okay, so let's so Patrick has a few others, but then I think we'll get to this a little bit eventually, because he says, well, and the end user in the recording contract, can we choose an arbitrator that we want? So
that's a softball. That's an easy one, man. In any recording contract, you absolutely can choose your arbitrator. I recommend choosing a forum because it's more flexible. Like if you name Fred and then, 2 months later, Fred retires, then like, what do I do? Do I go back to every single? Oh, well, no, I didn't say ECAS isn't the default. I'm saying you can name anybody you want to name, and that's always been true, right? Any smart contract, you can name any, arbitration forum or see, this is where people get weird. Like people criticize, I don't want to use ECAF. Then don't. Good God, you've always been free to name your own arbitrator. In fact, you can name Fred in your contract. Oh, there's a dispute. Now you and I get ready to handle the dispute. And we both go, Fred's great and all, but his daughter, Amy, is so much better. We both love Amy as an arbitrator. Let's use her. We could just go use her. We don't have to use the one we named in the contract. If we both agree to disagree in a new way, we can do that at any time. So, yes. You have access to an infinite number of arbitrators at all times. Now, another one of Patrick's questions is when it comes to referendum is, can end users review the code? Should end users review the code? And I think it's how competent are you? We have a kind of a flip attitude. A lot of folks in blockchain, it's like, well, you should have checked the code. If you don't like what happened, it's your fault. You should have read the code. Nobody reads code. Other developers don't read each other's code. That's why people keep rewriting things. It's faster to rewrite it than to go back to someone else's legacy code. And yeah, I would say you're right that for, how is an end user going to review code if they're not a developer? Yikes. And so what you've got here is yet another instance of the principal agent problem. And the principal agent problem is one of the oldest problems in governance, and it predates blockchain by thousands of years. If someone writes you code and says, oh, it does this. How do you know it does? Even if you are a developer, maybe you don't have access to a source code. Maybe you don't have time to go in and crawl through thousands of lines of code to figure it out. And if I were a block producer, I wouldn't review every piece of code. I'd only review stuff that needed reviewing.
Yeah. So,
because block producers don't have infinite bandwidth any more than you and I do. Anyway.
I agree. So,
we have Patrick on the call, I must say. EOS property, any object on chain that requires a private key to directly manipulate. Okay, so property is anything that is locked up with a private key.
Oh, so they added that, huh? So any object on chain.
And then maybe on the current chain ID, which we mentioned, if it requires a private key to directly manipulate, alter, transfer, or influence, or otherwise affect, then it's property. Cool.
So smart contracts and accounts are the two big ones, I would assume, right?
Seems like it, yeah. Tokens. Non-fungible tokens, fungible tokens, yep.
Okay.
An account is a human readable name that's stored on the chain. It can be owned through authorization by an individual or group of individuals. An account is required to transfer or push any valid transaction to the blockchain. True statement. To call is to submit an action to the blockchain. Authorizations and permissions. Permissions are arbitrary names used to define the requirements for a transaction. Permissions can be assigned for authority over specific contract actions by linking authorization or link auth. And by the way, most people are familiar with the owner key and the active key. Those are two permissions with arbitrary names, but you can make your own permission with a new name at any time. And that's, that's where you get into cool multi-sig stuff. And we are barely scratching the surface of what can be done with the, I think, very rich and interesting permission system that came with the EOS software.
Yeah.
And then let's see, Ricardian contract places the defining elements of a legal agreement in a format that can be expressed and executed in software. I think it's a terrible definition of Ricardian. It's not wrong, but it seems to me like it's leaving some things out.
Yeah, that seems too much like code rather than the human readable, just having anything dealing with human readability, I think.
Right.
So I'm not sure how that distinguishes from code, actually. So.
Yep. Well, maybe it'll get clearer further down.
Okay.
I think if it were me, and it's not, but if it were me, I might rephrase this to be more in line with the Wikipedia definition of a Ricardian contract. Article 1, we finally get into the body. Here we are 50 minutes into the call. Article 1, distributed jurisdiction. All records and actions on the EOS, I assume mainnet, the blockchain with that chain ID, are recorded forever. Due to the distributed nature of the blockchain, it's not subject to any particular, I would say, geographic jurisdiction. The EOS blockchain is to be governed by and construed under the rules contained herein. The EUA, yes. However, users are expected to adhere to the laws of their local jurisdiction. Yeah, okay, there's nothing, I don't see anything objectionable or questionable here.
Yeah, I like the idea of a distributed jurisdiction. The idea of this.
Well, I think it acknowledges the truth, right? That, if I issue a command on the mainnet and it gets executed by a block producer in Uzbekistan, and it affects tokens owned by a person living in Shanghai, and I'm in Oregon in the United States, like, what's the jurisdiction? And the answer is the mainnet. That's the jurisdiction.
Mm-hmm.
User types.
Interesting. Okay.
So you got the reg producers or block producers, reg arb. I think I would rewrite this to say that block producers are users who call reg producer, and arbitrators are users who call reg arb, and arbitration forums are users who call reg forum. I think I would rephrase it to make it clearer. That seems, again, I think we're still in definitions here. And again, these three calls here, these three actions, these system actions are mentioned as part of the governing document set. So that's very internally consistent.
Okay.
Consent. All users consent to these terms, definitions, and standards. The chain ID string is included in the signature of every valid transaction signifying consent. And what that addresses is the complaint some people have had saying, oh, I'm using the chain, but I haven't consented to any rules of the chain. And that's like, okay, do you go into restaurants and sit down, order food, and then leave and say, I never agreed to pay for it? No.
Yeah.
If you use the system, you're implicitly agreeing to the rules of the system. And if you want to launch your own chain where people are exempt from following the rules unless they explicitly agree, and you have some way of tracking explicit agreement, go launch that chain. But that's not what we have.
Yeah. So, but then I kind of to make the argument on the other side that a lot of people who've gone into the system haven't explicitly agreed to a lot of these. So, in order to do that, I think it's difficult because for most systems, for most user agreements, you need this kind of action that indicates and demonstrates intent and understanding. And so it's really hard to do. You
Yeah,
know?
I get what Article 3 is trying to do is get past that, and you're not wrong when you say that explicit consent is a really useful thing to have when you try to enforce things later. And it's both morally true and legally true that people ought to consent to things explicitly. And one thing that was suggested to me recently that I think is kind of genius is the idea of a non-fungible, non-transferable token that you could have in your account that would, your ownership of that token would indicate your agreement to some contract, like let's say the Constitution or the end user agreement. And the utility of such a thing would be that I might refuse to do business with people who have not explicitly agreed to the end user agreement. And the way I can tell if they explicitly agreed or not is I go look at their account, and if they don't hold one of these tokens indicating that they've agreed to it, then they haven't. And then you might still try to, snare them with this implicit consent article, Article 3. But having explicit consent out there on chain as an additional useful step, I think makes a ton of sense. Now, I don't know that I would rewrite
concept with a non-fungible token. I haven't heard that one before, so
yeah,
that is interesting. So.
Yeah, now just because people have the token, I think Patrick points out that people accept user agreements without ever reading any of the words. I heard a story one time that some software developers had put a line like 3/4 of the way through their user agreement saying, if you're reading this sentence and you send us an email at this address and you're the first person to do it, we'll give you $500. And that software was in use for a year and a half before somebody emailed them and said, does anybody claim this money yet? They're like, you're the first.
That's so funny.
If people are reading your stuff.
Definitely. Yeah, that's funny. Governing documents.
See, the governing documents are to be modified only by referendum.
Okay.
That makes sense. And then referendum itself is defined. And I think I'm seeing typos in Article 5. And you may need to wrap up here at the top of the hour. I know I need to go. So this will probably be the last one we'll look at.
Yeah, we could do it. Like, how many articles do they have? Just to maybe skip ahead and see.
Well, let me jump down and see. So 14, not too bad. And then they've got the Reg producer agreement, Reg Arb, and some other stuff. And so there's
they actually put that in. Okay.
Which is really smart for them to do that, I think.
Okay. So maybe we could just do a few more, maybe try to get halfway through the.
Yeah. I'll get at least open the can of worms of Article 5.
Yeah.
So let's see, user referendums must be submitted on chain, either in full text or as a hash of the referendum text, plus a link to the underlying text. Thank you, because the hash alone doesn't resolve anything. A user referendum is considered approved for execution once at least 15% of issued tokens have registered a vote, that is, they have voted for the associated referendum, with affirmative tokens exceeding negative stake tokens by a difference of no less than 10% of total percentage of registered votes. See here, this phrase registered votes is flipping me out, right? Clearly it's a reference here to registered a vote, but I would say cast a vote and votes cast, because that's more standard usage and I can understand that. And see, I think of registered voters and wait, am I registering to vote? Where do I register to vote? True. And now that opens up a whole incorrect line of thinking in my head.
True.
55 yes, 45 no. Much better than the language in the current interim constitution, which was my bad phrasing. This threshold must be met and remain above the minimum requirements for a period of at least 30 consecutive days within a 120-day period. Same as current concept, differently phrased, though, a little bit cleaner phrasing, I think, for some of this. Should a user referendum not be approved for execution within a 120-day period, is considered expired, must be resubmitted if another vote is desired. The 120-day period starts when the transaction, which includes the referendum question, is appended to the blockchain. EOS tokens issued during the 120-day period are counted toward the total issued amount calculation. That makes a lot of sense. Yep. That's an interesting corner case, because if you had exactly 15% voter turnout on day one, by day 120, new tokens have been issued through inflation. And so you might no longer have 15%.
True.
Because you've got to count your baseline of percent turnout by the number of tokens that exist, either at the beginning or at the end or both, because of course tokens can be burned or removed from circulation. So yeah, the tallying, by the way, on a referenda is really tricky.
Yeah. No, I'm sure that's one of the big challenges that, but I'm glad it's getting close. It seems as though they're getting close to.
Yeah, I've been tracking it kind of at a distance, just popping in occasionally, and I'm just so impressed with Gener EOS, EOS Nation, EOS Canada, all the folks who are participating in the referendum and the tally code work. It's really complicated. You have to not just track who voted, but every time they stake and unstake afterwards changes the size of their vote. So if I vote on Monday and I change my stake weighting on Tuesday, my vote just changed. Did you catch that? Your tally tool has to.
Wow. Yeah.
So it's not a trivial exercise at all. It can be done, but it's not simple.
So real quick about this referendum, when I'm looking at it, 15%. I'm not sure, but I recently looked something up in terms of voting, and I think they said 40% of the stake tokens are voting right now, and it seemed high. But if that's the case, I mean, should we move up the threshold to something higher than 15%? I mean,
good question. I don't know. If you want to change it, you'll have to do it through a referendum.
Okay.
That's the only way to change the only way to change any of this is you have a referendum saying that, after this referendum passes, future referenda must achieve 20% turnout, but you yourself would only need to get 15 to make that change.
Yeah. Okay.
So
cool. So we went through the definitions, principles, design principles, which are important. I think that takes a lot of, that's a lot of it. So, and then, we got through 5 articles, which is good.
Yeah. That doesn't mean we did them justice, right? There's no more to say about them. There's a ton here. True.
A lot. Yeah. Opens up a lot of conversations around a lot of different ideas we discussed. So really appreciate it, Thomas. We'll try to do this next week. Maybe just continue on. If you can drop by, that'd be great.
If you'd like me on, I'm very happy to do it. Anything I can do to help out, I'll do. Okay. Especially when it comes to, some of the backstory on these things, because I was involved in the very beginning. And I will say again, most of the mistakes are mine.
No. It's just, this is just like, no, I mean, everything.
This is all learning experience, man.
To do. Yeah. And this, it was just in such new territory.
We are the first governed blockchain, to be fair. Right.
Yeah, exactly. We might try to get Kevin too. It'd be good to get Kevin on, or someone from EOS New York as well.
Totally.
Just to get their insight.
They're absolutely brilliant. I would love to listen to a show that included them.
Okay. Great. So awesome. Thanks so much. I'll wrap it up as well. And no, thanks so much, Thomas. If there's any other questions, feel free to just reach out or just kind of put them out there. Maybe we can address it next week. Other than that, really appreciate it.
Looks like Patrick might have one more question about key recovery, I think. Is that the one you wanted to talk about, Patrick?
I think those are earlier. Okay. Maybe we didn't.
Yeah. Short answer is I don't know. I think that what we really need is programmatic key recovery. That or strong identity on chain or both. Because without those tools, you're asking an arbitrator. Normally, arbitration only exists between two parties with an explicit contract with each other. With a lost key, who are the two parties? Me and my key? I don't get it. Who, what? Can we somehow, EOS 911, it may be that what we need is somebody to set themselves up as a key recovery like service provider, and then they can name an arbitrator to help you with your relationship with them. And then that arbitration award can somehow be turned into an order for block producers to, fix the key. Hopefully it can be done through programming. I mean, key recovery exists on, I can't remember if it's BitShares or Steemit, but it does exist out there, as is code. It doesn't have to go through arbitration. So maybe somebody who's familiar with that code base can propose that as a upgrade through the referendum process. I'd vote for that if it could be, tested out, and if it works as desired. I'd love that.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. All right, sounds good. So anyway, hopefully, Patrick,
I love what you're doing, Jun. I really love this weekly show you do. I think it's incredibly important. Thank you for doing it. Yeah,
no, thanks for helping out and sharing, and providing all the knowledge. And then for everybody here, again, sign up for the governance conference. I was actually going to call it ConCon, like Constitutional Convention, but then because of the language and people were debating, I was like, okay, I'll just call it governance, GovCon instead. So, but it'll be fun. I mean, this is all what we've been kind of discussing for the last, months. And so hopefully, we're leading up to a referendum. So hopefully we'll kind of gather the momentum all the way up into the new year.
So last question from Patrick. And Patrick, if you want to stick your Telegram handle, actually my Telegram handle is Thomas B. Cox. If you want to just message me online, we can talk further in case I don't answer all your questions here. But his question is, when you think the Constitution should be accepted definitively? Well, whenever the voters voted in, whenever a proposal gets more than 15% voter turnout and 10% more yeses than nos and passes the threshold established in the current rules. A new constitution or governing document, end user agreement, whatever you call it, when it hits that threshold, that it's in force. And if two documents both pass, then the one that got more votes wins. So that's my understanding.
Okay.
Anyway, we'd love to see you on Telegram there, Patrick. Thomas B. Cox is my handle. I'll put that into chat here.
Okay, so at Thomas B. Cox is Telegram, which feel free to reach out. I guess anybody can reach out to you.
Absolutely. And I mean, if I don't like what you're saying, I'll block you. If you want to spam me, if you spam me, I'll block you. If you disagree with me, I will take notes and get smarter. That's what I do. Anyway, thanks so much. I got to run. Really appreciate you, Jen. I appreciate your audience too. Thank you all.
Yeah, sounds good. All right, take care. I'll see you guys next week.